Hello and welcome to Nesta Talks 2 with our guest Yancey Strickler. Thanks for being here on this beautiful, very hot day in, I'm in Oxford, so in the United Kingdom, but we've got people from across the world joining us today. So my name's Kate Sutton. I'll be your host today. I'm hosting because my work at Nesta is primarily focused on the role of business and the private sector and social change, and how social innovation can support modern business to put purpose at its center. So I'm really excited to have read the book and to be speaking to Yancey. Quickly about Nesta, we're a global innovation foundation. We bring bold ideas to life that change the world for good. And Nesta Talks 2, this series is is an informal conversational series with today's most interesting thinkers focused on the big topics that define our future. And in this age, there's a lot of information, a lot of webinars, a lot of activity happening right now in this COVID time. How do we make sense of the world around us? How can we play a part in shaping our future? And we've put together some incredible people to help us guide us through these questions. And today it's Yancey. Before I introduce him, I just wanted to say we're going to have a chance for Q&A. I think for those of you who joined at the beginning, you would have seen how to do that, but you can pop your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom there. And in the second half of this session, we'll get to those questions. So, and we'll be finishing at 5 in time for you to have a drink or enjoy the rest of the evening. So, excited to introduce writer and entrepreneur Yancey Strickler. He is the co-founder and former CEO of Kickstarter, a distinguished fellow at the Drucker Institute. He's been named a young global leader for the World Economic Forum. He began his career as a music critic in New York, but grew up on a farm in Clover Hollow in Virginia. But now he lives in Vancouver, Canada with his family. We can see your child there. Welcome. It's great to have family on board. The London Spectator called Yancey one of the least obnoxious tech evangelists ever, which I think sounds great. He's also the author of this book, This Could Be Our Future, a manifesto for a more generous world. And he's the creator of Bentoism, which is in this book. And we're going to be talking about the book and Bentoism today. So thanks, Yancey, for being here. Great to see your face.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Kate. Good morning, everybody. Afternoon, wherever you are.
Good morning to you, of course, being in Vancouver. So thanks so much for getting up and joining us. So the book, just to kick us off, the book is really in 2 parts, and the first part is quite a, you've made a really strong argument against financial maximization and for really reconceptualizing value. You know, how we measure value in society. I'm just really interested in how you came to devote your time and want to write a book about this.
Well, I'm not a traditional business person. Never took like a business course in university. I'm a creative person who got pulled in entrepreneurship because of just the brilliance of the idea of Kickstarter and just feeling so compelled by it. And so while I became I'm like a music critic was my old job. And so becoming a CEO inside like a big tech, not a big, but a big name tech company was interesting because it just, I felt like a fish out of water. And it just made me very aware of the kind of incentives and structures that we were operating within. And one that was really obvious, became quickly obvious even as we tried to distance ourselves from it, was the degree to which you are as a company expected to sort of like engineer every decision to produce the maximum profit possible. And that every investor conversation is pushing for that, that is just like, that is the blood, that is the cadence of business. And that you often end up in decisions because there are, clear decisions are made simply or made clear, but the harder decisions stick around for a while. And you often get in this place as a leadership team where there are 2 options, and one option has a financial outcome with some bad stuff that we either don't know how to quantify or don't take the time to quantify. There's an option two where like the bad stuff's not as bad, but also the financial outcome is less. And 9 times out of 10, the key is going to choose option one. And what I've seen being in the room for those things is that we struggle for a kind of a rational language to talk about those kinds of trade-offs and to see the perspective beyond just this financial one. And so I was really motivated by that as a CEO. And at Kickstarter, we did a lot to try to counter that. We became a public benefit corporation, which requires us to balance those financial interests with producing a positive public benefit, and it's a legal requirement. But I was also just interested in the individual experience of being a leader in a situation like that, and how difficult it is to make a good decision, and the ways that even your own team members or employees will say push for more financial growth because that is what they see in the world around us. And so with Kickstarter, we were always trying to build a bridge to a different model of what it meant to be a tech organization. I mean, we're kind of a post-tech arts company in a way, but just trying to imagine an organization that really has its purpose at its core, that is serving that purpose, and that it's puts its financial interest secondary to that, and to try to begin the process of normalizing that. And so the book is really making that case for why this is a critical shift to make, and really arguing that our focus on financial maximization is something that has really just emerged in the last 50 years or so, the way we experience it today. And there's no question a lot of benefits, but there's also a lot of negatives. And there's a lot of people attacking the financialization of our economy, but what is the alternative answer? What are we working towards if not that? And that's where I think we've been a little bit stuck. And that's what the second half of my book is about. Because I think I have an idea about what that is.
You do, and I'll get to it in just a second, but I think you're pretty scathing about financial maximization. I'm just looking at some of the points in the book. Monopolies of block competition and entrepreneurship, chains starve local communities of money and opportunity, corporations and the wealthy hide 10% of GDP in offshore tax havens. This is the negative. And if we hadn't gone down that route, 50 years ago, you argue the average worker would have been paid more, taxes for top earners would be higher, the rich would still be rich, but not as rich. And I think in the first half of the book, you really set out some stories that capture that. Were there any stories in particular, any of those kind of examples in particular that while you were doing the research for the book or doing the kind of story collecting that that really kind of drove you forward on this anti-financial maximization space?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just reviewing. It's just, I was really struck by something that the filmmaker Adam Curtis said to me. Adam's a friend, and we were talking about variety. But he was saying that he believed that self-expression is this thing that we all do that is like such a moment of our age that we can't see how it's a moment of our age because we're all part of it. But it's like how if you look at a picture of people in the 1920s, everyone's wearing the same kind of hat. You're like, why did everyone wear the same hat? And back then, everyone's like, I'm not wearing the same hat. That's whatever. And so I was, that thought really stuck out to me when he said that. And so I just began to think about this financial motive as being this underlying just assumption. But I think that it just what happens is that it limits our possibilities. It limits the possibilities of the world to those that are profitable and those that are profitable enough. And I had a wild moment of experiencing this. I went to a dinner after my book came out, and there were like billionaires at this dinner. It's not a normal thing for me. I was a wallflower. And then you're like forced to sit at your table with these people. And it's literally like a billionaire next to me, a billionaire across from me.
Okay.
And they asked me what I do. I tell them I wrote a book, tell them what the book's about. Explain the idea. It's about how we've been overtaken by this value system. Yeah. And they all look at me and they're like, two people immediately are like getting up from the table, check. But we start having this conversation. They're pushing back on this idea that we really are letting money run away from things. They're like, we're not focused on profit. It's just that our our businesses are so well run, and that the global economy means that these numbers kind of grow. And I mean, I do see there is some argument to that. But I was saying, like, well, could you imagine spending money on, say, what if planting 1 billion trees today is the single most profitable thing you could do for your enterprise? What if 20 years from now, the thing that makes you the most money is there being 1 billion more trees on the planet at that moment? Like, can you imagine the for that decision? And you know, people just weren't really having it. And at this moment, this CEO sat down, a CEO for a very famous outdoors wear company. And he's like, what are y'all talking about? And they explain that I'm like talking about this idea. And I say to him, look, you're the CEO of an outdoors company. Can you imagine that you took some of your budget and you put it into planting trees and protecting the environment? And that's what protects the lifestyle, allows you to have your business. And that is the best that you can do as the CEO of your company. And he just responded with the smirks, just saying, I see what you're trying to do. I see what you're trying to do. And just wouldn't commit.
Right.
And what I saw was there's this, we that money is the only valuable thing for as a in the business context. We believe that the only rational goal is a financial outcome, because that's what that guy's bosses are talking to him about. And the notion of using financial value to create another form of value that is in the benefit of your business is like, I don't know, it's like the missing synapse. It's crazy to me that connection couldn't be made. The idea that you could make an indirect investment that is producing a greater return. And so to me, it shows the degree that we are captured by the notion that all decisions must produce a financial return that beats the S&P 500 for this year. And that we've winnowed our world down to just the possibilities that what meets those possibilities.
Yeah. And I think that's a great story and a unique opportunity that not all of us get to have. So I think, probably many people watching this interview are thinking, yeah, I get this. I agree. I think this all makes sense. But, what do we do? I think it's really easy to attack. It's really easy to say, here's the problem. The system isn't working for us. But it's a lot harder to say, what is the solution? You have, in the second half of the book, you spend a lot of time talking about what you think the solutions are. And part of that is Bentoism, which I've kind of, reading the book, I see as a philosophy as well as a set of tools to help individuals or help companies, help organizations to make kind of better decisions around the future based on a different version of value. And I just wanted you to talk to us, because this will be quite new, I think, to everybody.
Yeah, totally.
Webinar.
Totally.
So it'd be great
fresh off the street.
About this and what's it about.
Yeah, let me. I'm gonna share a screen, talk about it. It started for me, as I was digging into this question of financial maximization, and I read Wealth of Nations, and it's a lot about trusting to act according to self-interest, and this is sort of like the root level of some of capitalism, one part of capitalism, and really started thinking about, well, how is it that we find self-interest? And that became an interesting question to me. And so around this time I started, let me know that you can see this. You can see that screen.
Not yet.
I'm screen sharing a Chrome window.
Well, here we go. There it is.
Okay. And so, yeah, so so one day I thought, I'm just going to try to draw self-interest. Like, how do you visualize this? And I drew this, a chart of a line going up and to the right. And this is called a hockey stick graph in Silicon Valley. And this is where your self-interest, money, power, fame, whatever it is you want, is growing so fast, the line just shoots to the moon. As I looked at this picture, which to me embodied how I thought of self-interest, how that was represented to me in the world, it occurred to me that this is just a small slice of a much larger picture, because the x-axis representing time, it goes from now all the way into the future, and it goes into the past too. And the y-axis measures self-interest, it also keeps going, because as our self-interest grows, so do our responsibilities. They go from me to us. And so actually, I thought there are actually 4 distinct spaces of our self-interest. There's now me, what I want to need right this second. There's future me, what the older, wiser version of me wants me to do, the person that I am becoming every day by my choices. There's now us and my friends and family, the people in my life who I care about. And there's future us, which is my kid, if you saw earlier, or everyone else's kids, if you don't. And the first time I drew this, I thought, every decision I make leaves a footprint in every one of these spaces, right? Every choice I make shapes my future me. It impacts the people around me, but yet I'm blind. Really, everything is now me. And so after I drew this, I wrote a very simple description of what I draw, and I wrote beyond near-term orientation. This was a simple frame for seeing beyond the near term, and I realized that was an acronym for bento. And I thought about the bento box. Yeah, truly. I thought about the bento box. And the bento box is the Japanese packed lunch with 4 or 5 compartments and a lid. And the bento allows you to have a variety of dishes, not too much of any one thing. And it honors the Japanese dieting philosophy of hara hachi bu, which says the goal of a meal is to be 80% full. That way you're still hungry for tomorrow. And so I thought bentoism is the same idea, but for our values and our decisions. A way to see the world, not just optimizing for right this second, but to leave space for the future and for others. And so this is a philosophy, like you said, Kate, but it's also like a tool. It's a user interface. You can ask your bento a question. So here's a smoker asking their bento, should I quit smoking? Now to use this, they simply ask each of these boxes individually and see what it has to say. And each box will have its own perspective. So the smoker's now us here up left, should I quit smoking? The smoker now us says, yes, your family hates it. It's bad for your children. The smoker's future us, should I quit smoking? They say, yes, imagine if your kid smokes because of you. The smoker's future me says, yes, I want you to quit smoking. I want there to be a future me. But the smoker's now me says, no, keep smoking. Like quitting nicotine, quitting cigarettes is gonna suck. I'm addicted to nicotine. And this now me voice has a rational perspective based on a very limited point of view. This is a hard voice to reason with. And so where we get trapped today is with this kind of passive awareness where we really only see now me. We filter all of our choices through like, I'm gonna go get mine. We don't think about the future. We struggle to think about other people. We know these things are there, but these are more secondary thoughts rather than primary thoughts in our decisions. This is defensible in a lot of ways, but it also gets us into trouble because when you only see now me, it makes something like addiction, like smoking, which just satisfies your immediate craving. It makes that look good. But on the other hand, it makes sacrifice, giving up something now to get something more later, or for everyone else to get more, that looks irrational, right? And this is where we're in trouble with climate change. We keep looking for solutions to climate change that help our now me. But the issue of climate change is that it's different. You got to give something up. Maybe the Green New Deal is a clever way to create the now me of economic stimulus at the same time. But you could see the need is to see this active awareness, to see all dimensions of ourselves, and that the potential, the resonance of your actions is so much more when you, that's really possible to do when you know what's going on in each of these spaces. So in each of these boxes, there's a very simple question that you answer. You go through a brainstorming process, and I could show you another time how to do that, but just showing here my own values. So my now me, what is it that I want to need? What is it that, how am I at my best on a day-to-day? It's when I'm showing people the matrix, connecting ideas, like through going through a lot of brainstorming, I came to think this is kind of my superpower, what I'm best at. My future me, that older, wiser version of me, it's telling me to create harmony. It's telling me to not sell out. I'm a child of divorce. I came from like punk rock and indie music, so I have a certain value set. My now us is about a core group of family and friends and having really deep focused time with them, being hyper present. And my future us is about imagining for my child a better matrix. It's not that there isn't a matrix, but that it's working to their advantage. And I actually use this to make decisions. So, yeah, you want to talk now? You can interrupt me.
I just think, I really like it as a decision-making kind of tool. I think it intuitively makes sense, and it helps me as someone who is very much like toggling between now me and future us constantly, which I think is a weird kind of weird space to be. But I think kind of one of the criticisms of this kind of philosophy and tool, I guess, is that it, for those of us who are in, I guess, perhaps in privileged positions with, income and the space to kind of think and pontificate, but there are lots of people out there, and now, particularly now, who are really unable to get away from now me. Now me is quite live and quite real. And I just wondered, yeah, talk to me about that. Like, talk to me about that criticism, and what you're thinking, and how it can be put into place.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I hear. I hear. It's to me, it's such a, and I don't mean this to you personally in any way, Kate, but it's such like a rich liberal critique to me, to where we believe only other rich liberals have values and have virtue and have time to think about that, right? Because every major religion, it is preached from the beginning of time that money is an impediment to clarity, to salvation. That Jesus would say it's easier for a camel to pass through a needle's eye than a rich man to get into heaven. Like, money and materialism are seen as blockers towards seeing oneself. And it's only in this modern day where we celebrate wealth that we think only wealthy people can get those things. We deny people without wealth even the right to have agency in their lives. We think you're too busy washing dishes all the time to think about anything, which is, I think, is just kind of classist. And the reality is that for someone who is lower income, I actually think that they quite possibly have a healthier relationship to their bento, someone who is very wealthy, because for someone who's now me is hard. Now me is a struggle. Their job sucks. They have many responsibilities. Yeah. That person likely leans much more on their now us, of their family and friends, for support. They probably have a stronger community of people around them. They need that us. The us is not a secondary thing. They also probably lean on the future me of maybe having strong religious beliefs and think about an afterlife and imagining their actions being filtered through some ultimate outcome. So I think that there is a high degree of awareness. It takes different forms. I think a wealthy person who can satisfy every now me desire with materialism, yes, they might have a bigger retirement plan. They might have friends on more continents. They might have other things. They might have things that from a statistical perspective look like a far better life. But I would contend that I don't think that person is happier than the other person. So I think that we confuse. I think we give wealth too much credit, personally. Yeah.
And just taking a kind of step up away from the individual. I mean, coming into 2020, I was feeling quite optimistic in the work that I do. Working with the private sector, and there was a lot of dialogue around the failure of capitalism. We had some quite mainstream organizations, including the Financial Times here, talking about how capitalism's failed. We need a reboot. We need something different. And then COVID hit, and I'm just wondering, what your view about whether this crisis, this moment, or this public health crisis, and now going into an economic crisis, has accelerated or kind of decelerated the potential for the change that we want to see, or you're arguing for.
Accelerated for sure. Those of us following what's happening now, we will have seen the rise of the financial machination empire that has dominated the economy and government for the past 20 or 30 years. And I think we're also going to be seeing its decline. I think that what we're going through now is like, in the United States, where I'm from, it's, seems to be out of control. It seems to also be the case where you are. The so-called advanced societies have shown themselves not to be. They've been coasting on that for about 30 years now, on their own exceptionalism. We can see who the advanced societies are. It's Asia, it's Scandinavia. So the West will have to face up to that or not. So Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think that if I think that this is accelerated changeover of power because the people in power are doing such a terrible job, because they have their sense of what the world is so off the map. And listen, we've all moved off the map after COVID, and very few people have a sense of where we're going. I think that there are, maybe 20 voices that I think shaping where we're going. And so this is a moment of real question. But yeah, I think that you have to have these crises to force shifts in paradigm. If you read Thomas Kuhn, the structure of scientific revolutions would introduce the idea of paradigm change. You have to have these crisis moments to make people realize that the system is no longer producing the results that people expect it to. And once that happens, then people are forced to seek a new rational structure to their thought, right?
Yeah. In terms of leadership, I'm really thinking a lot about leadership in COVID. I'm a New Zealander living in the United Kingdom, and we've really seen a huge juxtaposition between the leadership of those two countries and the kind of results. So it's something quite kind of dear to me. But I think it's not just leadership around how do we get out of COVID? It's leadership to how do we, when we talk about build back better, right? Everybody's using this hashtag. What do we really mean here? And how do we implement some of the ideas that you've raised in your book? And what are your reflections on some leadership for this time?
I think, there are leaders that are equipping themselves very well, and they're people that just show a roundedness of the human experience. They're also almost all women. There's clearly, this isn't a moment where leaders are failing. It's a moment where a certain type of leadership is failing, and where certain ideology is failing. But it's also an ideology that is very good at creating distraction to make us forget its failings. Like, you could argue Brexit's just a distraction from austerity, right? The failures of austerity. Like, Brexit was just to make people stop thinking about that. So I think that there are new leaders coming up. I mean, certainly you have the AOCs of the world. Yeah. You see every poll show Generation X, Y, and Z, where the people that will be in charge the next 30 years all have very different, views of the world than those younger than them. I think the most important thing for these new leaders to keep in mind is to think of us as four-dimensional beings. I just finished the afterword for my book that will come out in the fall, and I talk about how if you map all the major institutions of the 20th century, like education, science, pensions, social security, churches, unions, all of those institutions serve to buttress different parts of the bento, right? Churches, unions, those are now us institutions. Pensions, social security, those are future me institutions. That's providing you some stability. Education, science, those are future us institutions. And all of those have been in decline because we've been bleeding those to produce more me returns. And we're, a generation and a half, 2 generations of very deliberately defunding and de-emphasizing the institutions that had made our societies cohesive and coherent, all in a bid to drive now me. And so this is the trap. The trap is this passive awareness. But past generations didn't have this, right? Like, after the Great Depression, after the war, those people saw the need for these infrastructures. They had to go through the pain of the breakdown to see the need for that full dimensionality. And so we're going to go through that loop again. And some people are already there, right? Young people are already there because they've grown up on the internet. And the internet makes us a network organism. And I really truly believe it is this kind of bentoist perspective that can simultaneously hold the individual and the collective, and now in the future, and the past is another thing to talk about as well, but that can simultaneously hold things and balance them. That's the move forward. That's the forward. And we, I get that it's easy to just only pursue growing financial growth because it's like a single metric and it's seductive, but that will only work for so long. And so we're really expanding our dashboard from just the now me, from just financial value, to instead multiple dimensions of our self-interest and a wider spectrum of value. Okay? What we count as valuable, what we define as valuable as a metric is going to change considerably.
I'm going to go to some of the questions. We've got a good group of questions here coming in. So we've got a question from Amy Cosgrave. She's asking, with the increasing pressure on public services and funding in the public sector world is changing to focus on how we can make more profit through public services. So this is the context. How do you think your ideas are applicable to the public services?
Well, I have to confess that I don't have, I don't have any experience working in public services. So I can't speak to how decisions exactly are oriented in those contexts. If I can show, I'm going to show a slide again to answer this.
Yeah. We love it. I love these graphics. It's you're making it for people like me. I understand.
Okay, so so here, so I tried like conjugating the bento, but for an organization. This is for a company. So I think for a public interest, it could be fit similarly. Where the now me is for a company is your mission or whatever your priorities right at the moment are, sort of the next 3 months or something. What are you doing? The future me for a company is its values, which are often expressed as like the brand promise, what you get from the product, but like what kind of we stand for. The now us for a company is laying out its stakeholders. So its employees, its customers, its investors, its community members, and then also saying what their explicit like promises to those people. By using our product, we will always do this for you. And then the future for us is the vision statement, where you want the world to be in 10 years. And so if you think of a company like Apple, so Apple's mission statement is to build tools for the mind that advance humankind. So their now me are to build tools that advance humankind, plus hitting their quarterly metrics. Apple's values, its brand promise is, to sum it up very simply, is to think different, taking from an ad campaign. I laid out here its promise to customers. Apple is always like the just works technology, going back to DOS in the 80s. It was just like a simple one. Apple's super privacy. It's a walled garden. It's hard to get into their systems. They're very protective. And then the future us of Apple is tools that advance humankind and grow Apple, because they're ultimately self-interested. So one thing that's interesting here is that for all companies, basically their now me and their future us are the same. It is profitability. It is a world where they are more important than they are right now. So a lot of what distinguishes companies is their ability to fulfill this sort of their values and their customer promise. And so for Apple, if you think about two products, there's AirPods, the wireless headphones. So they satisfy the different value, right? They look different. They also satisfy this customer expectation of being a just works product, because you just put them in and they play, you take them out, they stop. So it's the AirPods are like very on point Apple product from the bento. It sort of satisfies all these needs. If you compare something like the Touch Bar, which was like a little strip they on a keyboard, which is a big failure, it did think different, but it didn't offer any utility. It didn't just work. So in this way, it was like unsatisfactory. It didn't meet the expectations. It was like, wasn't cohesive with what we think Apple to be. So that like the best is fulfill all of those dimensions of responsibility. And so if the responsibility, I mean, I'm not familiar with this, the idea that public service need to be profitable. I mean, I certainly some here in the US. So that's like a part of, so maybe the augmenting, think of as the responsibility of a public service to insert a now me profitability inside of it, which feels strange, but maybe that's how you integrate it. But I don't think I have all the context on what you're talking about.
I think we're sort of seeing some kind of, blending of models and this kind of need to generate some form of income. And it's very hard to have those future goals when you're doing that. It makes the now me, what do I do in that situation, quite hard to navigate, I think, for people. But another question from James. He's asking, what's really changed within the global financial structures and reward mechanisms for staff and CEOs that means your ideas might seriously be adopted? So James asks, what's really changed within the global financial structures and reward mechanisms for staff and CEOs that means your ideas might seriously be adopted? You know, what's really changed here?
I think that, I think that the crises are driving a closer look at a number of things. And I think a crisis that's going to emerge out of this is going to be a crisis about ownership. Because we are headed towards a Great Depression for about 80% of people, you know, for some significant segment. But the idea that we will be headed for a global depression will clearly not be true, because those who own these companies will continue to see their valuations increase. We're seeing now, right? And like people on top are making a lot of money. Because the market is, you know, is sort of solidifying itself. And so what will become obvious is that, you know, we don't have a depression. We just have that for some people. And that what distinguishes who has and who doesn't will be ownership. And it will become clear that most workers have no stake and have no say in the things that they build, and that we have an ownership structure that is entirely based on financial capital, that only sees financial capital as being valuable, that will allow work to be translated into financial, you know, into a ownership in a tiny trickle of a way, but that it's based on this entire model. So I work with a startup here in the U.S. that's a consumer subscription service. You subscribe to a musician that you like. It's kind of like Patreon, but it's a co-op. And all the artists and even some of the people who support artists, they co-own the platform together, and they will co-manage it. When there are profits, they'll be redistributed to all the members. And I think a paradigm shift in ownership model to create something that's more fair. I think that's something that could happen. And interesting, if that happened, it would really be a seismic challenge to existing players, because say if a new social network started had distributed ownership at its core, as its core promise, Facebook can't compete with that. Yeah. Facebook is built into a financialized system. They're locked into something that already exists. And the reason why I think is very plausible is it's something like, you know, people under the age of 40 own what percentage of wealth in the world. It's tiny. It's like less than 20%, less than 15%. Old people have held it all, and they still keep holding it all. And the only thing that's going to make it leave is death. And of course, they're trying to change tax laws to keep it through death. Yeah. And so what you're going to see is especially younger people and employees have more power inside organizations. Like every executive team is terrified of their employees right now. And you're going to see employees step up, and they're going to force their hand. They're going to force the hand, and they're going to say, they're only going to work inside organizations where ownership is structured within us. Screw creating value for someone else. Like there's other things I can do. I think that a crisis of some people living lives of luxury, most people be destitute and seeing no potential for their lives to become better. If we enter a period like that, which I think we might enter for a period of 5 years or so, then I think you will see these break down. And then like, yeah, why am I driving for Uber when I get no equity for my work? You know, and you start to have those conversations in a real way.
I agree. We're definitely seeing that, and I think that feels quite exciting in terms of change. And we'll a few questions about change, which I think we'll get to in a minute. But if you want to put a question in, you can put it in the box, and if you want it to be answered, you can upvote it. So that's how it works on my screen. I get to see the ones that most people want answered. So William, I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong. We responded quickly to the threat of COVID-19, and I think we, generally did. Yeah, our behaviour changed instantly, but climate change is a bigger threat, and this is the question that lots of people are asking right now. Why can't we change our behaviour to counter that threat?
Well, there's a moment in COVID. There's a moment, a crisis that change things. And listen, the farther we get from that moment, we can feel its effects diminishing. This is already normal, right? This is normal now. This isn't weird anymore. And climate change has lulled us to sleep. It has lulled us to sleep. And and the degree of change feels so far beyond any of us. I mean, the fact that what we've done so far would only like part of the way get us to what the change that needs to happen, that like this lockdown hasn't been enough, right? Hasn't been enough is like a real look in the mirror of like, oh wow, how deeply do we need to unwind? So yeah, I mean, it's about how we found the news. It's like, if you get, it's like dying from obesity.
Yancey seems to have a bit
I'm
of
back.
Oh, he's
I'm
here. There
back.
we go. I was just
Sorry about that.
your book. Did you want to finish that, or should we? You're in the middle of a very good point, and I was like, yes, climate change.
No, I mean, action on climate art. It has started. I'm a big supporter of XR, Extinction Rebellion, and I think there's a lot of momentum, and I think that as we look for how to restart post-COVID, I think we're going to turn to Green New Deal kind of things as a path, and so I think, but yeah, I mean, obviously we're way late, and who knows what the reality of that's going to be. I mean, if it weren't like there's a vision, I can imagine a world where we build the perfect system, and like the next 20 years we build the perfect thing, and just as we like spit shine the last block of our new palace, like the tidal wave of climate change comes through and wipes us out. I mean, I can imagine that we create total social equity and justice, and then the waves wipe it out. I can imagine that version of this next 20 years, but we'll see.
Jonathan's asked a question about universal basic income. So given the value propositions that you're putting forward in relation to money, I'm really interested in your view on universal basic income. So I know you talk about that in the book. Do you want to kind of go over your views on that and some of the other solutions?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm now totally for it. Pre-COVID, I was more skeptical. I was more skeptical because I've sort of viewed UBIs assuming like that we've run out of work to do or something, that we'll all need jobs. And I just keep thinking like there's more work to do than ever. We're doing the wrong work for so long. I'm like, man, we are behind, so that's kind of a little bit my attitude. But yes, I mean, I think every person should have their, every society's core promise should be that your now me needs can be generally met here. They can be met with dignity. They can be met with integrity. And that includes providing health care, that includes economic opportunity, that's providing, a safe and fair environment. But there's table stakes, but that's not something the U.S. can provide anymore. It can't. So yeah,
Okay.
it's, yeah.
In the book, you talk quite a lot about change. So, you're arguing for change. Change needs to happen. And Janet's asked about, power and change. She says, what about power? The people with power are focused on maximizing now me. They have vested interest in defending the status quo. How can we get change? And just looking at my notes, I know you talked about sort of this, passing on values and norms and kind of incrementalism when it comes to change. What's your view around how we get change?
I'm very influenced by a number of writers, but one in particular is Donella Meadows, who wrote Limits of Growth. But her great piece, Places to Intervene in a System,
yeah,
which talks about if you have a system that's producing outcomes that are not desired, like how do you change the outcomes of a system? And it's like she counts down from I think 71 in terms of effectiveness. And the most effective things for her were a paradigm change or values changes that just cause everyone to shift their perspective. And so it's like it's an external change that gets people in power to change their minds, right? Because they see the world differently. I believe that really the whole book, my whole being, what I'm about is trying to made real the idea that our self-interest is rationally seen as being 4 dimensions and potentially even larger with time. And I think there's a defensible argument that the human history has been about an expansion of consciousness steadily. And that post-internet, post-network, the notion, and also in a world where climate change is coming, that the notion for our species to have a clear sense of the future and of each other becomes rational, practical, and I think a foundation for a lot of other things to happen.
Yeah.
So I think that's like a core piece. And so I think these changes, I think these changes are coming of just the large systems that we're built on, and that we've just seen how quickly moods change. I mean, we think of values as being fairly steady, but they're constantly in flux. Like one I think about, I mean, the book I write about how exercise is something that was invented fairly recently as like a hobby. But even in the business world, a value like transparency is very new. Like transparency was not a value until like Enron and corruption. And then there was a breakdown of businesses like selling too much sizzle instead of steak. And so a new value emerged of transparency. And that was used as a way to signal your goodness. And now transparency is like as core as it gets. And that happened over the course of about 15 years. And so these things change constantly in response to problems. And so I think that this breakdown is big enough, and I especially think the voices arguing for change are bold enough, and the need for changes is so significant, and the kind of change needed is so significant that I think in this moment there's a moment that will carry us in a different direction. But there needs to be more darkness first. I mean, I still think civil war in the United States is on the table as a possible outcome.
Okay. We've got a really interesting question from, is it Kariuki, who's in Kenya, and it's coming from you. In your sort of preface to the book, it talks about value. It would be great to, assign rational value to other values besides money, things like community, purpose, and sustainability, is what you argue. And she or he, sorry if I'm getting the gender wrong, is saying that, this is describing how we lived barely 100 years ago. I'm in Kenya, and there is still a lot of this approach to life. Is the West willing to learn from those who are still practicing this way of life? Or better still, would they be willing to dialogue, to encourage those of us in Kenya who have adopted a Western culture? So, and I've lived in Africa for the last a few years ago, and I certainly saw that kind of drive to be part of this American culture is so strong. In my culture, no one slept hungry and no elderly person was left to fend for themselves. There was always someone to help. So I think really kind of compelling question. How would you like to respond to that?
Love that question. Yeah, I mean, I think that the West has a lot, but humility is not one of those things. So I think the idea that the West would go and ask and try to learn, if we were wise, we would. But I think that is unlikely. But no, I agree. I don't think that, I think the fact that, say, in the West, we have had powerful institutions that have supported these dimensions of humanity for a long time shows that we're not the first people to be talking about these questions, and that people face these same questions about 100 years ago, right? And for very similar things. I mean, you could argue that the 1920s are like a very self-oriented decade, right? And produces these breakdowns. So I think that there's a repetitiveness here. I think the West is in real trouble because a lot of the challenges of the West have been built on a short-termism, right? A short-termism that's produced climate change, a short-termism that's produced a social structure that's so fragmented. And so we're going to need long-term kind of solutions. And of course, no one thinks more long-term than China and Asia. And there the horizon is far longer. And I think that kind of reasoning and perspective is going to be needed. And that this is going to be part of this changeover that's going to happen in this century. And for the West, this is like just the biggest choke job ever. It's like the fumbling of power in the way that we have allowed a wealth of knowledge, of social wealth, of all kinds of things. We've allowed that to slip away. I think largely because we didn't know how to stand up to powerful authorities. You know, everyone was too polite. They wanted to like take their little cut, let it keep going. And, you know, our shadow has eaten us. And so that presents the need for new solutions. That presents the need for, I mean, the ideas I'm talking about, I think ultimately we'll talk about this as post-capitalism, where we are having exchanges where financial outcomes are critically important. Like you can't lose money all the time. But however, money will just be one of, 10 metrics that we think about based on the circumstance. In the book, I write about Adele using an algorithm to distribute concert tickets using a loyalty score. And this is a way for her to make it so it wasn't the richest people who saw the show, but the people who cared the most. And so I think we're going to be moving into those kinds of systems that, as this person's great question points out, have closer echoes to what life was like generations ago. But now are going to be happening, I think, at a global scale because of the internet and because of technology. And we'll be bringing those models rather than simply just copying this model that we had at the moment the internet was born.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a friend in Kenya who can dialogue the next book. That's a great point. Another question from William: is it more pertinent to ask why people consume? So we've got a few kind of questions and comments around sort of consumerism and capitalism to tackle the issue at the level of consumption rather than at the level of a system like capitalism or communism. What's your thinking around that?
Yeah, I mean, that's like cultural values change how we view consumption, right? I mean, we could feel the waves of it happen. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I haven't really thought deeply about how to change that, because it's the people that opt into like consuming less are just the usual suspects. Like, how do you expand that to someone who I would have gone to the high street today, or I would have gone to a mall today, and I'm not. Instead, I'm going to do something else. Yeah. I'm not sure. Except I would say it's a potentially a larger cultural value change that happens. I mean, while I wrote my book, part of it I wrote. I was living in Los Angeles, and I wrote in a 90-year-old woman's house. Okay. This woman I met, her name's Noel, she's amazing. She had this amazing house that her parents built, this like architecturally beautiful house. And she would just work on it all day by hand. She fixed it up by hand. And she liked having company, so she invited me to work there. And so we would have lunch together, me and this 90-year-old woman. And she's amazing. Noel also, Osheroff, a great artist too. And one of the things she talked to me about was how her whole life, she was born in the 1920s, her whole life, she brought up believing that rich people had no class. If you have class, then you don't care about money. You know that other things are important. And if someone is wealthy, that shows that they're moral or wrong. And in her mind, that was how kind of everyone saw things until maybe like the 80s. She's like, maybe around then it started to be different. Yeah. But in her mind, that's always how she saw things. And I have a similar memory growing up. Yeah. And my parents now, I do not come from wealth at all. Very working class family. My parents still are. And now I think they see wealth differently because our culture has seen it differently. We've come to celebrate it as like an unqualified good. But yeah, attitudes have been different. And I think kinds of changes are possible. And again, if we end up with like a Great Depression for 80% of people, and then for the top 10%, it's like the world's on clearance sale and just buy up whatever you want, and then maybe we're gonna see those values changed in that degree.
And I think in the book you do spend a lot of time talking about how it's only really a recent change, and I think that's it's obviously there's lots of really interesting stories in here, but for me, after reading the first section, you really get to the point where, hold on, my idea of what's normal, what's kind of set in stone is certainly not, it's only been the last sort of 20, 30 years, and that kind of financial maximization being the last 50 years. I think we've got time for one more. We'll go with Mike's question. So I love your idea of a philosophy for more harmony of self, better work-life balance, and so greater well-being for the planet. Yeah, that's beautifully written, Mike. Do you need less capitalism and less consumerism? And so a better world is created for individuals, social groups, and a whole tribe of human beings. So similar question around like consumerism. And if the answer is yes, which I think is what you were saying, you know, what is there to be done? Like, what do we do about this? How do we create this?
Well, maybe one thought for that is like, there's a study that of American college students every year that talks about their goals in life. And I use it in the book to show the degree to which the belief in wealth has grown, which is crazy. It's like 28% of college kids in 1970 thought being rich was essential. Today, it's like 86%. You can chart it. Over the last 10 years, there's been a new rising value. I don't talk about it in the book, but it's now up to like 45% say it's essential, but it's called be a values entrepreneur. And values entrepreneur means activist, NGO, like start something that is intending to change the value system of society. And that is rising. And I saw a report last week showing that the percentage of new entrepreneurs who cite like social purpose, non-financial goals as why they are being entrepreneurs, that is increasing considerably and might even be the dominant reason why people become entrepreneurs at this point. So I think that that's something that can change. The organization, and predominantly as a corporation, is the most powerful structure we know for human organization other than a family, right? It is hugely important. And so applying that to solve these sorts of challenges, I think is critical. And I think what's going to happen is that we're going to learn how to grow values other than money, that there will be companies that exist to grow the community value of an area or of people, and they'll provide a service that does that. They will be compensated in such a way that it will make rational sense for everyone to do these things, but we will discover that we can more directly create other forms of value, and that we will properly value those things, to where now, like someone who's a social worker, right? It's like a shit job, right? And so we will properly value those things. And I think this is the transition that is happening. And I think there's a lot of things, reasons why you would say that this is possible. But again, I expect more darkness in the near term. But I think what's critical is us to move forward, not just rejecting. I think you gotta kind of yes and on what's here, kind of like the improv rule. You never say no, you always say yes and. You build on what's here. And building on what's here is about, taking it on face value that human beings are trying to do their best. We're all trying to do our best with what we know. We're just still learning. And armed with knowledge, we can make better choices. And that this is a moment where we're all collectively looking for that. COVID has created that hunger for it, it's created a global collaboration. If you could imagine what would be happening in the world right now if Donald Trump weren't president, like the degree to which everyone was coming together, right? And really accelerating a different kind of consciousness. So all those things are still there, and they're going to be happening. And I think that these are hard, tiring moments, but that there's reason to hold your head up and just know that it's not happening tomorrow, but the things that we're doing right now are going to build that infrastructure. And I think 2-3 years from now, we're really going to be feeling it.